Christian missions have been very successful in Africa, one of the most Christian continents in the world, and very unsuccessful in India. Why? Because Africa is basically theistic in background, despite the polytheistic overtones. It's basically theistic. It's easy to convert someone. You tell them about that high god or sky god's son and how he died for their sins and can deliver them from darkness, and you get converts quite easily. But you go to a pantheist and say Jesus is the Son of God, and they say, oh yeah, Krishna was one too. Join the club. They absorb. Pantheism is what I call a cosmic suction pump. It goes and swallows it up. Just swallows up everything that comes in its road. And because we don't understand it, we're not able to be successful in communicating the gospel. What I'd like to do now is to discuss pantheism, several varieties of pantheism. Look at the first quote there about Brahman. Thus Brahman is all in all. He is action, knowledge, goodness supreme. To know him hidden in the lotus of the heart is to untie the knot of ignorance. Self-luminous is Brahman, ever present in the hearts of all. He is the refuge of all, the supreme goal. In him exists all that moves and breathes. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? In him we live and move and have our being, which was really a pantheistic poet that Paul was quoting on Mars Hill. He is both that which is gross and that which is subtle. Adorable is he, beyond the ken of the senses is he, supreme is he, attain thou him. Now that comes from the Upanishads, the Hindu scriptures, and it's a description of what a pantheist believes God is. God is all is God. Mary Baker Patterson Glover Eddy, the founder of Christian Science, was a pantheist who said God is infinite, God is good, there's infinite good, evil is nothing. There are a number of pantheists in the Western world. Parmenides was a pantheist. Hegel was a kind of pantheist. Spinoza was a pantheist. But today, pantheists are upstaging Christians because they're saying things like Victor Furcus said here in this quote on ecology. Religion must be revitalized so as to sustain us during the impending global scarcity of resources. It can best do this, he believes, in the form of eco-theology. What's that? It's an approach to religion that starts with the premise that the universe is God. Now, Christians believe that the universe is a creation of God, and we should treat his creation with respect. Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's and all it contains. Genesis 1:28, subdue the world, control it. But a pantheist says, I can do you one better. The world is God. And you Christians have messed it up, and we pantheists are going to be the salvation of the world ecologically, because we can't live if we don't save our environment, and you've killed it. Now, in your Judeo-Christian materialism, let us save it. So we've been totally upstaged. The ecological front is the cutting edge of pantheism, and the people who are really out there infiltrating the Sierra Club and some of the finest conservational kind of organizations are quite often influenced by pantheism. In the entertainment industry, the Beatles were probably the single most influential factor in the last generation that turned people to pantheism, because they not only became converts of the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, but they incorporated it in their music. George Harrison had a top-selling record entitled My Sweet Lord, in which they're actually singing praises to Krishna and other Hindu gods, and mixed in with hallelujahs, by the way, to show that East and West are joining. In the 1970s, there's a popular jazz rock group called the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and they were singing pantheistic songs. There's a group now called the New Age Musicians on the West Coast. There's a whole radio station out of San Francisco. Where else would it come from that's dedicated to this kind of music? On the theater level, almost all of the great movies in the last 10 years have been pantheistic or have had pantheistic overtones. All the Star Wars series, all three of those, E.T., Raiders of the Lost Ark, Poltergeist, All of those films are pantheistic, occult forms of religion. And they're all teaching the same thing. There is a force, there is an impersonal something, a Tao, into which man can tap and do unusual things. I don't know if you've noticed, if you go to the Taylor bookstore, or whatever bookstore, you can see a whole shelf. There's one whole section dedicated to pantheistic books. Alan Watts has been a famous pantheistic writer for years, and now you have all the Unity School and the New Age writers that are writing in there too. Mark Satin and Ferguson's books and all of the other New Age luminaries. Then you have Hare Krishna, Transcendental Meditation, Divine Light Mission, Vedanta Society, along with Alan Watts, Suzuki, Radha Krishnan, and many of the new cults, all pantheism. What is a pantheist, and how many different kinds of pantheists are there? We talk about, in point 2 here, a typology of pantheism. Let me draw a few diagrams here to illustrate the various kinds of pantheism. The first one is called emanational pantheism, and we use Plotinus, a 3rd century A.D. philosopher who was a colleague of Origen, the famous church father. Both of them studied under Ammonius Saccos, the famous fountainhead of Neoplatonism, and they believe that everything emanates from the One. The One is beyond being, absolute, no knowledge, no personality, beyond being, and the One flows down into the next level, which is called nous, or mind, and the nous flows down into world soul, which animates everything, and then world soul emanates forth into matter, which is the least real, and brings you to the very brink of oblivion or non-being. So you have God flowing forth like Niagara Falls, or unfolding like a seed into a flower. That's called emanational pantheism. Creation is ex deo, out of God, and God just breathed out, as Brahman would say. Brahman breathed out and the universe came to be. Brahman breathed in and the universe ceased to be. So you have a kind of cyclical pantheism. Well, one form of that, one move of that, is called emanation, not creation. Emanational pantheism. Second form of pantheism is called developmental, or sometimes dialectical pantheism, and this was held by the famous German scholar Hegel, who died in 1831, and he said, history is the footprints of God in the sands of time. History is just the unfolding of God. And if you want to understand history, you must understand that it's divine spirit manifesting itself in the historic process. Now, all Hegel did is he took Plotinus, who had a top-down emanation from the One down to the world soul and through matter, and he laid Plotinus on his side with his linear view of history that he got from his Christian background, because Hegel was a Lutheran. And he laid Plotinus on his side and said, God is not emanating from top down, he's emanating from begin to end, and history is going toward an end, an eschaton, and it's unfolding, evolving. You can see Hegel dying in 1831. In 1859, Darwin wrote The Origin of Species, in which he gave a credible scientific mechanism for this, and the whole evolutionary concept of God unfolding. Henri Bergson, who was a famous French philosopher, at the turn of the century, wrote a book called Creative Evolution, which he said there's this elan vital, this vital life force pulsating in everything, and it moves the whole process forward. And then in his book, Two Sources, Henri Bergson, Henry Bergson for you Americans, said that this force is God, and he identified the force with God. It's no different than the force in Star Wars, the force of the Tao, no different than the impersonal God of Spinoza or Plotinus. So you have emanational pantheism of Plotinus, developmental pantheism of Hegel. The third one is called modal, M-O-D-A-L, a modal pantheism of Spinoza. He lived in the 17th century, and he wrote a book called Ethics, in which he developed what's called a rationalistic form or a geometric rationalism. He used axioms and postulates and argued rationally that there could only be one substance in the universe, one infinite pond of which we were all drops or drips, whatever the case may be. We're all just little modes or moments in the mind of God. You and I are like ideas in God's mind. There's only one mind in the whole universe, and everything else is part of its thoughts. One infinite global mind that animates everything, and you and I are just little moments or thoughts in this mind along the way. So we're drops in a pond, we're thoughts in the mind of God, we're aspects, accidents in God, a mode of God. Then there's another kind of pantheism called multi-level pantheism that is expressed by Radha Krishnan, who's the famous neo-Hindu apologist for Hinduism to the West. Radha Krishnan says that God, instead of emanating straight down, you can look at Brahman, or the ultimate, and here's the first level manifestation, then another level manifestation, and a third level. And you get down to the lowest level, you're down at Maya, or the world, down there, and that's an illusion. So it's the lowest level of reality, or no reality at all, depending on the two schools of pantheism, whether the more strict or the less strict forms of multi-level pantheism. But the universe is made up of various levels. The highest level is Brahman himself. And when you reach that level, then you realize your oneness with God, and you merge with the all. Then the last kind is called permeational pantheism. And I think this is illustrated by Zen Buddhism and Star Wars, where there is an impersonal force that penetrates the whole universe. It's in every living thing. You cut a plant, and you're cutting into the force. You look at a flower, and the force is there. The force is in you. It's within you. The force is everywhere. Everything is part of the force, and the force is part of everything that is. So God is all, and all is God. So here's just a kind of a typology, so you have a framework on which to pin the various kinds of pantheism. I'm not sure that's all, but at least that is the major kinds of pantheism that exist.
How many forms of pantheism
Okay, there is another form of pantheism that we should mention here, and that is what we call absolute pantheism, and that would be the pantheism of Parmenides. And an absolute pantheist is someone who believes that only thing that exists is God and everything else is an illusion. And that's the only form of pantheism that would say that the world is a total illusion. And that would be found in Sankaristic pantheism in Hinduism, and it would be found in Parmenides, the Greek philosopher before the time of Socrates. But it's a very rare form of pantheism, because most of them make some kind of distinction, but they make no distinctions whatsoever. They say the one is all and the all is one and everything else does not exist at all. Whereas in Spinoza you have little modes that exist in God's mind. You have emanations in Plotinus. You have development in Hegel. You have other two sides of the force, and we're all part of the force, and permeational pantheism. But in absolute pantheism of Parmenides and Sankara, total illusion. The world is totally non-existent.
But now, they have to answer evil. Like crystal science, the answer to evil.
Their answer to evil is it doesn't exist. Dismiss it and go on and think about something good. They all have to contend with evil, but the point is that the absolute pantheist contends with it by saying it's absolutely nothing. It's an illusion, an error of mortal mind.
Well, isn't modern philosophy towards
Modern philosophy, if you mean pantheistic Eastern philosophy, yes, because they're adopting this pantheistic approach. And even in a book like the Tao of Physics, Copper's Tao of Physics, you get that. Reality is becoming fuzzier and fuzzier, more ethereal until there's nothing there. Let's take Vedanta absolute pantheism as the first example from the Vedas, the Hindu scriptures, the final section of which is called the Upanishads. And here in Vedanta pantheism, Brahman, who is the ultimate reality, our equivalent of God, but an impersonal ultimate God, is said to be infinite, immortal, imperishable, all-pervading, supreme, changeless, absolute, indivisible. And notice the quotation here from the Upanishads. Him, Brahman, the eye does not see, nor the tongue express, nor the mind grasp. Him we neither know, nor are we able to teach. Different is he from the known and from the unknown. He truly knows Brahman who knows him as beyond knowledge. He who thinks that he knows, knows not. The ignorant thinks that Brahman is known, but the wise know him to be beyond knowledge. So, God is beyond knowing, and if you think that you know him, you don't. The only knowledge you can have of God is the knowledge that you have no knowledge of God. In the Upanishads, Sankara in his commentary is saying, "Sir," said the pupil to his master, "teach me the nature of Brahman." The master did not reply. When a second and a third time he was importuned, he answered, "I teach you indeed, but you do not follow. His name is silence." See, the student asked, "What is Brahman?" Silence. "What is Brahman?" Silence. "What is Brahman?" Silence. "What is Brahman?" "I've been teaching you, but you haven't listened." It's silence. You got silence 3 times. It's kind of like the Third World War knock-knock joke. You know, you started, knock-knock. See, nobody there, Third World War. It's silence. You have to teach indirectly. You can't teach directly. Like we can teach God is good, God is infinite. We can teach directly, cognitively, propositionally. You can't teach pantheism that way. You have to do it indirectly by suggestion, by little contradictions called koans. You have to talk about one hand clapping. So people say, "That's absurd." And you say, "You got it. That's absurd." Their view of the world is that God is the world and the world is God. Now, we're using world in the biggest, broadest sense, the all. God is all and all is God. The world that we see, hear, touch, taste, and smell, does not actually exist. It's Maya. This is an absolute form of pantheism. It's kind of like a rope that looks like a snake from a distance, but when you get there, you find out that it's not a snake. So when you're looking at the world at first blush, you think it's real. But when you get closer, you find out it's not real. All that's real is Brahman. It's the lowest level of manifestation. Brahman alone is, nothing else is. He who sees the manifold universe and not the one reality goes evermore from death to death. Meditate, and you will realize that mind, matter, and Maya, the power which unifies mind and matter, are but 3 aspects of Brahman, the one reality. The final analysis, there's only one reality, one thing, and that's Brahman. What is man? Man is God. Atman is Brahman. Now that's the famous statement of Hinduism. Atman means the depth of your soul. Brahman is the depth of the universe. The depth of your soul is identical to the depth of the universe. At your heart, you are God. Now, you can see that humanism and pantheism have something in common. They have a lot of things in common. Evolution, naturalism, and the other thing they have in common is man is God. Man is ultimate. That was whispered, I think, down the corridors of time from a serpent about Genesis 3, when he said to Eve, "Ye shall be as God." And man has believed that ever since. Having attained to Brahman, a sage declared, "I am life. I am established in the purity of Brahman. I have attained the freedom of the self. I am Brahman. Self-luminous, the biggest treasure. I am endowed with wisdom. I am immortal, imperishable." The whole quest of life in the plan of salvation is for you to realize your godhood. And when you see the power within, the force within, is the same force that was in Christ, is the same force in the universe, and when you develop that potential, whether through est or human potential movements or through meditation or through yoga, when you develop that potential and tap into that force, you are just as much God as anyone else, including God himself. It's just a matter of degree and discipline from there on. What's ethics? Ethics is the belief that man can transcend this world of illusion by discovering his true self, and that he has an obligation to do this, and he also has an obligation in this world to discern good from evil. So far, that sounds harmless. But when you get to the depth of their ethical position, here's what they're really saying. There is no ultimate difference between good and evil. Because on the highest level, there is no distinction between good and evil. The highest level is to unify all things. This is why the Force in Star Wars has two sides, good and evil. Because in God, good and evil unite. Meister Eckhart called it the coincidence of opposites. Somebody referred to a philosopher's view as the night in which all cows are black. Now, if there were ever a night in which all cows are black, it's certainly the view that good and evil are combined in God, and that in Him they merge. And on the absolute level, there is no distinction. Notice what Krishna is saying in the Upanishads. He whose mind dwells beyond attachment, unattained by ego, no axe shall bind him with any bond. Though he slay these thousands, he is no slayer. Even murder, even killing, ultimately, there is no difference between it and not killing. Man's destiny, according to Sankaristic pantheism, is twofold, near view and far view. Near view, your destiny is called samsara, endless circles of death and reincarnation, death, rebirth, reincarnation, and so forth. That's a round and round we go, a kind of cosmic merry-go-round which never stops. The trick is getting off the samsara merry-go-round. Salvation is to get off the merry-go-round. Most of us think that recreation is to get on a merry-go-round. They think salvation is to get off. How do you get off? Well, by meditation, discipline, living a better life so that you don't come back in another reincarnation, which is simply to punish you for what you did in the previous life. Because there's a little law called karma. And karma is the moral principle of the universe, as infallible as any moral principle could ever be. Whatever you sow, you reap in the next life. That's karma. Sow it in this life, you'll reap it in the next life. No forgiveness and no exceptions. That's the law of karma. That's what keeps you on this merry-go-round, samsara. How do you get off? Sow well. Live good. Plato once said in one of his books, I think it was Phaedo or Crito, he said, if you don't live good in this life, you will come back either as a woman, sorry girls, that was Plato, a kite, or a cow. So choose how you want to live. You may come back in a reincarnation. In fact, even Hinduism today believes that there is no salvation for women. Women as such cannot be saved. You ever talk to these Hare Krishna girls? You know, real sharp, attractive girls? You ask them if they can be saved as a woman, and they will debate you right to your face. It's impossible for a woman to be saved. That's part of their punishment. The only way you can be saved is to be reincarnated as a man in another reincarnation. And that's what our young teenagers are getting at O'Hare Field and the airports of the world, this kind of teaching. Man's destiny is reincarnation. Round and round we go. Where we stop, only karma knows. If a person's karma is good, he will come back in a good reincarnation. If it's bad, he will have a bad one. But salvation is solely by human efforts. Forgiveness is contrary to the heart of the system. Because if you forgive, you broke the law of karma. Because this fellow sinned and he deserves to be punished, and you forgive him. In fact, as is pointed out by many missionary anthropologists, Hinduism as such, as a system, leads to no social compassion whatsoever. Because if you help that person, you're messing up his karma. If you help him and show compassion, he's going to have to pay for it anyway. You're just delaying the agony. So why help him? Let him pay the price now and come back later. Now, to some degree, Hinduism has overcome that, but it's almost always a direct result of Christian missionary activity that's been in India that's helped them. How do you do good works? They're not the same in this world. They're the same ultimately. This is why George Lucas, when he was asked by Time magazine to summarize his philosophy, said, well, it's like this. There's a God, and there are two sides, a good side and the bad side, and the world works better if we tap into the good side. the key phrase, the world works better. On this level down here, things work better for tapping into the good side, but ultimately there's no difference. Yes. That's exactly right. It's a good illustration. The physical universe in pantheism is like the physical universe in your dreams. It doesn't exist except in your dreams. Don't use the word physical, more real. It could be a lower level of reality. For them, the physical universe is real. The other ones, the multi-level and the permeational and developmental, could be a lesser reality, but only in absolute pantheism does have no reality at all. The basic view of Gandhi, that's right. Gandhi was a pantheist. Well, Gandhi was doing it on the basis of his pantheistic philosophy. He rejected Christianity. Now it is true he admired Jesus and he liked some things in the Sermon on the Mount. It was basically the pantheistic interpretation he had made of the Sermon on the Mount, but he was by no means a Christian, and his central philosophy was pantheistic. He believed in reincarnation. He drank cow urine and ate cow dung. He was a sexual pervert. See, we've been propagandized by the film Gandhi. The film Gandhi was a great propaganda stunt as part of the Hindu missionary effort in the West. And when you come back from seeing Gandhi, how many of you saw Gandhi? What was the impression of Christianity, that dumb Christian and those dumb English Christians, and look how wonderful Gandhi's Hindu philosophy was? It made Christianity look bad and Hinduism look good. That's exactly what they want you to believe. But they didn't tell you he was a sexual pervert. They didn't tell you he didn't live with his wife, but he lived with a bunch of gals. He had his own harem. They didn't tell you he drank cow urine and ate cow dung, did they? They didn't tell you that he was a racist in South Africa, and that he was a murderer and a butcher of people in South Africa. And Christianity Today, the Gandhi, what was the title of their article? The Gandhi, what? Learning from Gandhi. Well, what can you learn? Drinking cow dung, or eating cow dung and drinking cow urine. How much can you learn? What was he trying to do? Get the British off their neck and get freedom for India. I mean, politically, but in terms of his philosophy, he was trying to attain nirvana, trying to attain ultimate union with Brahman. The goal, see, there are two goals. The near-view goal is to overcome your circles of samsara. Get out of your reincarnation cycle. Now, when you get out of your cycle, here's what happens. You merge with the all. You become a drop in the infinite pond. Now what that does is it brings you absolute peace. Because what's bringing you frustration is round and round we go, or this dualistic thinking, I, thou, subject, object. You have to overcome subject and object, I and thou, and merge with the all, and you're at absolute peace. Of course, you don't exist anymore either as an individual, because there is no individual immortality. There is just cosmic immortality. This is why Luke Skywalker, or rather Ben Kenobi and Yoda in Star Wars, when they died, they became more powerful. That's got to be a temptation to suicide. Because if you become more powerful and influential in your death, why not help it out and get a little more power? And remember, when they died, it's because they merged with the Force, and they gave, as it were, more force to the Force. Because their force and the Force combined to be a greater force as they merged with it in their death, and then they could influence this world more.
Yes. Historical question. Did Greek pantheism precede Plato? Is it older than Plato? And also, do you think that there was any common influence between Greece and
Did Greek pantheism antedate Plato? It's hard to know there were certainly forms of Greek mysticism before that. There were the Pythagoreans who were very mystical, and they had a quasi-pantheistic view of the universe. But we have only fragments. The pre-Socratic, the whole pre-Socratic thing, Greek and English translation, you get in one little volume, so there's not much to go by. But one thing is certain, that the later Plato went into a kind of pantheistic view, and by the time you get to Plotinus, that had come to full-orb Greek pantheism in Plotinus, 3rd century A.D. And before that, you have kind of growing forms of it in the what are called the Middle Platonists and the forerunners of Plotinus, like Ammonius Saccos. All right, let's take a look at another form. T.D. Suzuki has a little motorcycle shop down the street here. Suzuki is a professor at Columbia University, and he has convinced many Westerners of the truth of pantheism, including Alan Watts, who has a whole armful of books on the shelf in most bookstores. Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism, which is probably one of the most intellectual, powerful, and influential of all forms of Buddhism in the world today. Zen is not a system of philosophy, says Suzuki. It's not founded on logic and analysis, and it's opposed to any kind of dualistic thinking. Subject-object distinction, God, man, creator, creature. It's opposed to any of this. Instead, Suzuki calls us to hush the dualism of subject and object, forget both, transcend the intellect, sever yourself from the understanding, and directly penetrate deep into the identity of the Buddha mind. Outside of this, there are no realities. So enter with me into the Buddha mind. What must you leave at the door of the temple? Your mind. Check your mind, check logic, check reason, check your senses. You can't sense it and you can't think it. How do you contact it? You feel the force. Let the force flow, Luke. Feel the force. Close your eyes, Luke. You're looking. You know, all those Star Wars. If you've seen Star Wars, it's easy to illustrate. Just if you haven't, you've got to see it. It's great. According to Suzuki, Zen has nothing to teach us in the way of intellectual analysis. It has no doctrines which are imposed on its followers for acceptance. As such, Zen has no sacred books or dogmatic tenets. Zen teaches nothing. It is we who teach ourselves. Zen merely points the way. That's great. No creeds, no Bibles, really no teachers. In Zen, it merely points the way. Zen is not a religion, he says, as popularly understood. Zen has no God to worship, so in the true sense of the word, it's atheistic. No ceremonial rites to observe, no future abode to which the dead are destined, no belief in personal immortality. And last of all, Zen has no soul whose welfare is to be looked after by somebody else and whose immortality is a matter of intense concern with some people. In Zen, God is neither denied nor insisted upon. Only there is in Zen no such God as is conceived by the Judeo-Christian mind. They don't mind you calling the Tao or Zen or the Buddha mind God, as long as you don't mean God in a theistic sense. No such God exists. Further, Suzuki claims that Zen is neither monotheistic nor pantheistic. Take the latter with a grain of salt. It all depends on how you define pantheism. If you define pantheism as the way we did, no creator-creature distinction, ultimate naturalism, all is God and God is all, it certainly is a pantheism. What then may we say of Zen? According to Suzuki, Zen is the ocean. Zen is the air. Zen is the mountain. Zen is the thunder and lightning, the spring flower, summer heat, winter snow. Nay, more than that, Zen is the man. Shirley MacLaine wrote a book, Out on a Limb, where she surely was when she wrote it, in which she tells of her contact, her reincarnations, and all of her experiences. And in the book, she talks about watching someone pour something out. I think somebody was pouring milk into cereal, and she said, you know, as I looked at that, there was God being poured into God. And once I saw that and understood it, that God was being poured into God, the milk is God, the cereal is God, the table is God, I'm God, I'm you, you're me, and we're God. So that's the powerful ending of when Luke Skywalker cut off Darth Vader's head and saw inside his helmet himself, his own head, because I am you and you are me and we're both God. I've even seen bumper stickers like that. I am you, and you are me. Pantheistic bumper sticker. Good morning. How are you today? Thank you. I am well. Here is Zen. Please have a cup of tea. This again is full of Zen. Tea is Zen. In other words, Zen is life. I raise my hand. I take a book from the other side of the desk. I hear the boys playing ball outside my window. I see the clouds blow away beyond the neighborhood woods. In all of these, I'm practicing Zen. I'm living Zen. No wordy discussion is necessary, nor any explanation. Just experience it. All of life is Zen. God and man are one and the same. God and the world are one and the same because God is all and all is in God. Now, there are a lot of other interesting things that Suzuki says here. The one I want to stress is his view of ethics, because he believes that ultimately there is no distinction between good and evil, and even though the practical disciplines of life are to develop one's character, and if you know a Zen Buddhist, he's trying to overcome egoism and desire, because they believe that the heart of all suffering is desire. And if you can quench desire, you can solve all problems. The difference between East and West in a single sentence is the Western philosophy is to make a man happy, add to his possessions. The Eastern philosophy is to make a man happy, take away from his passions. And they look at us and they say, you haven't made yourself happy. You have a little house, what do you want? A bigger house. You have one car, what do you want? 2 cars. You have one house, you want 2 houses. You keep wanting to add to your possessions. That doesn't make you happy. What you need is to take away from your passions. Desire less. Now, what's the logical end of that? You desire less and less until you desire nothing. And when you desire nothing, then you merge with the all. And you lose all frustration, all pain, because you wouldn't have any pain if you didn't really want something and not get it. You would never have any pain. Pain is not getting what you wanted, or the converse. Lose all your desire, you lose all frustration, and then you've reached nirvana. That's the extinguishing point, when all desire goes out. It's also a glob of protoplasm, or a rock. I mean, I can't think of anything less desirable, to use a bad pun, than having no desire. A rock doesn't have any desire, but when you merge with the all, you become a desireless being. Now notice what it says here in terms of a quote on good and evil on the top of page 85 in perspective. A Zen monk, this process toward and within enlightenment involves a great deal of manual labor, such as sweeping, cleaning, cooking, fuel gathering, tilling the farm, going about begging in the villages far and near. The central principle by which the Zen monk is to live his life is not to waste, but to make the best possible use of things as they are given us. The teaching of the 7 Buddhas, not to commit evil, but to do all that is good and to keep one's thoughts pure. This is the teaching of all the Buddhas. That is in this world, Francis Schaeffer would call lower story. But ultimately, the Tao has good and bad side, light and dark. And ultimately, there is no difference between good and evil, and it doesn't make any difference what you do. It does not count for eternity.
Is that the far view? Because the near view is the far view.
The near view is to burn out your karma and to get out of your reincarnations, and the far view is to merge with the all. Man's destiny is the blissfulness of nothingness forever. Man's destiny is for his individual bubble to burst on the ocean of infinity and to go deep into the abyss of the nameless and to lose your individuality in the cosmic wholeness. It's rather interesting. He said, empty-handed I go, and behold, the spade is in my hands. I walk on foot, and yet on the back of an ox I'm riding. When I pass over the bridge, lo, the water floweth not, but the bridge doth flow. You say, what's that? That's nonsense. That's a contradiction. No, that's called a koan. And a koan is a little contradiction, a little paradox. One hand clapping. I go over the bridge and the water isn't flowing, but the bridge is flowing. All these little contradictions are to show you that reason, thought, cognitive process is absurd. Where will that get you? It'll get you where Western man has gotten himself into fights and contradictions. But if we realize our oneness, then that's the salvation of mankind. And the oneness that they are realizing is a pantheistic oneness. And the ecumenical God today is a pantheistic God. The glue that holds East and West together now is pantheism. And it is the most dangerous, the most permeating of all religious forces, much more dangerous than humanism ever was or could be, because you can't reason about it, you can't think about it, you can't argue with it, you can't see it, you can't smell it. It's not subject to logic, it's not subject to truth or false, right or wrong. It's something you feel, you take a blind leap of, but it's this force that binds all together. All right, that's a little characterization of pantheism. Let's look at some of the basic tenets then. Number one, God is impersonal and one. Most pantheists believe in an impersonal God who's an absolute one. Premise two, the world flows out of God. Creation ex deo, not creation ex nihilo as in Christianity, out of nothing. Premise three, God is the world, and the world is God. God is all, and all is God. Premise four, miracles are impossible. Now this one's a little deceptive, because they talk about miracles and they use the word miracle. But a miracle in the sense of a divine intervention from outside into the natural world is impossible for pantheism, because there is no outside. There is no God out there. There's only God in here, because God is the world and the world is God. So technically speaking, there are no supranatural acts, only supranormal acts, beyond the physical into the spiritual force, but not beyond the natural realm. Fifth premise, man needs to unite with God and discover his godhood. Look to the God within. Realize that you are God. Premise six, there are no absolute ethics. On the ultimate level, no difference between good and evil. Every action under certain circumstances and for certain people may be a stepping stone to spiritual growth. But in the highest sense, there can be neither good nor evil, one pantheist said. If we say, I am good or I am bad, we are only talking the language of Maya, the illusion of this world. Finally, history is an illusion, or at best cyclical. Some pantheists say there is no history, because that's all part of the world, which is an illusion. Those who talk about history say it's going round and round in a circle. Now, let me say a few words of evaluation of pantheism here. A couple positive things first. At least you should commend a pantheist for taking a global, universal view. At least he's doing philosophy. At least he's not thinking in a little compartment. He has a cosmic, universal approach to everything. Secondly, he does stress the indwelling immanence of God, something forgotten often in Christians' high emphasis upon a transcendent God out there, that we do live and move and have our being in him, and that God is within the universe, and he is active and personally involved. 3, only God is absolute and necessary. That ultimately I'm not absolute and I'm not necessary, but there's strong emphasis upon God as the absolute, necessary, ultimate, certainly a wholesome emphasis that we need, because in humanism you get just the opposite. Finally, pantheism stresses correctly that we should not ascribe limitations to God with our limited language about him. Language sometimes is a hindrance in talking about God. It limits, it is an eclipse of God, to use Martin Buber's phrase. But despite these positive things, there are some serious problems. Problem number 1, pantheism is self-defeating because it says, I came to realize that I am God. And yet it says God can't change. Now, if you changed from a state of non-enlightenment to a state of enlightenment, then you aren't God, because God cannot become enlightened. If there is a God, he must be enlightened and must always have been enlightened. If he came to be enlightened, he's not God, because he changed. If you came to realize you were God, you aren't. If you wake up tomorrow morning and say, by Jove, I'm God, you're not, because God can't wake up tomorrow morning and discover he's God. So it's self-defeating. Secondly, how can evil be a total illusion? Because if evil were a total illusion, how could we distinguish between reality and fantasy? As one of their own put it, if when I was asleep, I was a man dreaming I was a butterfly, how do I know when I'm awake I'm not a butterfly dreaming I'm a man? That's a good question. He just doesn't have a good answer to the question. Third, pantheism fails adequately to handle the problem of evil. Even if evil is an illusion, where did the illusion come from? Why is it so pervasive? Why does evil seem to be so real? I mean, you kick a Christian scientist in the shin, and it hurts. Even though he says it's an illusion, it still hurts. Why is it when I sit upon a pin and it punctuates my skin, I just like what I fancy I feel? It still is there. Fourth, if God is all and all is God, as pantheists maintain, then evil is an illusion and there are no absolute rights or wrongs. There's a good illustration there that when a young Hindu was asked if he believed there was any ultimate good or evil, and he said no. And somebody reached over and took a hot kettle of water that they were making tea with and held it over his head. And he said, what are you doing? He said, well, ultimately, cruelty and non-cruelty are no different, are they? And then notice the last line. Thereupon the Hindu walked out into the night. Certainly wasn't going to stand under the scalding water on his head. But if it doesn't make any difference ultimately, why not pour the scalding water over his head? Why not be cruel? Doesn't make any difference ultimately, just immediately. It's a little discomforting, and that's an illusion anyway. Fifth, to say that God is infinite and yet somehow shares his being with creation is to raise the question how an infinite can be a finite. Finite means not infinite. Infinite means not finite. Now, if God is infinite and I am finite and I am God, then the finite is the infinite and the infinite is the finite. That's a little difficult to swallow. Of course, Suzuki has no problem with that because he says that's your problem, you're thinking logically. At which point we respond by saying, and so do you think logically, because they couldn't even write a book, state their position or express it if they didn't assume, for example, Zen Buddhism is true. What does that mean? All non-Zen is false. But once you say it is true as opposed to something else, then you've used the law of non-contradiction. You've used logic to deny logic. Or the statement, I want to think beyond all thought. Well, if you think beyond all thought, you didn't think beyond all thought because you thought. And the thought that you've gone beyond thought shows that you haven't gone beyond thought because it's a thought. Can't avoid thinking. Another criticism is pantheism says that God is unknowable in an intellectual way. But this is either meaningless or self-defeating. How do you know God is unknowable? If you know he's unknowable, he's not unknowable because you know it. If you say, I don't know if he's unknowable, then you haven't said anything about God. So either you're not saying something, or what you're saying is self-defeating. To know that God is unknowable is itself an act of knowledge. Finally, a pantheist denies that logic applies to reality, as we said earlier, is self-defeating, because when Suzuki says abandon logic, he uses logic in his abandonment, because he doesn't want you to abandon non-logic. He just wants you to abandon logic. Now, suppose you will say, I want to steer away from logic, but I don't want to steer away from non-logic. What does that mean? Logic is the opposite of non-logic. But that's logic, because logic says it's either logic or it's not logic. And if you say it's either logic or not logic and stay away from logic so that you be sure and stay in the not logic category, you're using logic to tell you what is not logic as opposed to logic. You can't avoid logic. He who breaks logic will in the end be broken by logic. Now notice all of these arguments, or most of them, boil down to one thing. When you're dealing with a pantheist, you cannot attack his metaphysics head on. You have to attack his epistemology. And that's why it's so difficult to witness to pantheists. Because a pantheist, if you argue toe-to-toe, metaphysic to metaphysic, worldview to worldview, he'll lose every time. He'll swallow you up because he has broader ground than you. His cosmic suction pump will just pull you right down the drain. But if you take one step back and challenge the basis for his making those statements, what is your basis for saying logic does not apply to reality? How can you do that without using logic? How do you know you can't know God if you don't know God? How can you become God when God can't become? You got to back up and attack the epistemology. See, if we allow them to do this, to do an end run on reason, to run around the mind and grab the feelings, to speak right to the feelings without going through the mind, they've won the day. That's why the charismatics are winning in the epistemological fight in the world today. I'm not used to all these amens. I know it's like sick 'em to a dog, but throws my rhythm off. Some people go well with the amens. But the charismatics are using a mystical epistemology. The charismatics are using a pantheistic epistemology, and ultimately they're going to end in pantheism, because it'll be the ecumenical glue that breaks down barriers that brings people of diverse doctrinal beliefs together, because they'll no longer use creeds, content, cognitive material to distinguish what they believe. And if you don't distinguish what you believe from something that opposes it, then both truth and falsehood are true. Because if the true is not distinguishable from the false, then you can believe both true and false as true. And that's the ultimate deception. I believe that pantheism, at least their epistemology, is the devil's greatest tool. And when he said, ye shall be as gods, and identified man and God, and and dissolved the creator-creature distinction, he really made his great deception, and it's come right down through the history of mankind up to the present.